Get started, I'd like to introduce our speaker, Jennifer Brittingham. She's from the Smart Center. So with that, I will hand it over to you, Jennifer. Thank you.
Thanks, Kristen, and thank you all for joining tonight. Today's lecture and series we're going to cover is talking about school is out, and for a lot of families, having school being done for the year or almost done for those of you who aren't done yet. Has mixed emotions, especially when it comes to having children with selective mutism. And so hopefully tonight we'll cover a number of strategies and get you thinking about some things that perhaps you weren't thinking about for your summer. To just tell you a little bit about myself, as Kristen said, my name is Jennifer Brittingham, and I do work at the Selective Mutism Center. We are located right outside of Philadelphia, in the suburb area. And I've been with the Smart Center for just over 20 years, if you can believe it. And so that's a lot of years working with children and teens with selective mutism. In working at the Smart Center, I love this diagnosis. I love working with families, coaching, and school consults, and I love training. And so some of the work that I do at the Smart Center, in addition to speaking events like these, I do a lot of work with parent education at our intensive community camps that we do over the summer and throughout the year. My favorite part of that, not only working with the kids, is doing parent education. And we offer a lot of parent education during that time. So I get to know the families pretty well. I've also spoken on our Unspoken Words podcast, which is great. It has a lot of information, doing school consultations and trainings, professional trainings, coaching with families and teachers. In addition to individual treatment. And so I thank you for allowing me to speak with you all tonight. So interestingly enough, I'm starting off with what is selective mutism, and you might be thinking, Jen, why are we talking about this? We know why we're here. We signed up for the webinar. The reason I bring up what is selective mutism is because there are families sometimes who go through the school year where maybe their school staff have been sort of hinting that maybe selective mutism is the diagnosis or maybe the challenge that their student has been facing, and maybe parents at the end of the school year are just sort of learning about this, depending on the age of your child. And so I put this here for two reasons. One, that if you are new to the diagnosis of selective mutism, one, you're not alone. And as Kristen mentioned, there's a parent support group with SMA, which is really helpful and a lot of resources for you. The community that's joined here tonight is all here for the same reasons. The other part is when you are new to a diagnosis or have been walking through it, sometimes we don't know how to explain it to individuals. When we're trying to explain, when someone says your child is just shy, it can be really difficult sometimes to say, well, yes, but no. And so having a concrete way to explain it that makes sense to you is really important. And so I provide this short definition of selective mutism because I find it helpful for those who are just coming into it or just starting to explain it. On the other hand, if you are someone who said, actually, we've been working on strategies and goals for quite some time, but we're heading into the summer months. Why am I giving the definition to you as well? Because you may be having summer plans that might involve new people, new coaches, new leaders. Maybe you're visiting family you haven't seen in a while. And again, having something to encapsulate what your child is experiencing can be helpful. And so just to touch on this a bit, what is selective mutism? It's a complex childhood anxiety disorder. And so it's just not anxiety. It's not just social anxiety. It's not just mutism. So it's complex. And so a couple components about this is that it really does take into account the selective nature of the mutism, which is it impacts there's barriers to your student or your child's communication, and that's because in certain select settings it's harder for your child, and with certain select people they're not as comfortable when they feel a select sense of expectation. They may bridge down in their communication, and so we see this in different environments. And so it's really important to have a working definition that you can share with others, especially as we're going into the summer months. Another part that I always feel is important, and if you participate in any training I've ever done, I talk about presentation a lot, and I use that word because your child's presentation of SM matters. And I'll say that a number of times this evening. Why does it matter? Because under that diagnosis, and we know that if a child has selective mutism, there are some barriers to their communication. They're not communicating the way they do at home or where they're most comfortable all the time. So there's barriers. So why are there barriers? What's getting in the way of that communication? And one of the things that we talk about is presentation. All kids with selective mutism present a little differently. Now, true, there are some characteristics that are similar and the same for a lot of kids with SM under the SM umbrella, but there are other characteristics that we need to look at and say, my child has selective mutism, and maybe as we're talking through the different stages of communication, which we're going to talk about, they present a little differently. So just to go over this briefly, is that when we look at our social communication bridge, which I'll show you in a moment, it represents different stages of communication. Starting at stage 0, which really points out a lack of communication, a lack of comfort. And so when a child's in a shutdown mode and they're not communicating, we actually can see that some kids present differently in that shutdown stage. And it does depend on their age and other contributing factors to their selective mutism. For instance, some children can be in stage 0 and they look like they're in fear. They have tremendous anxiety. They are shut down. They are not making eye contact. They look physically very anxious. And so that's one presentation. But on the other hand, there can be kids who are in stage 0, but they actually look pretty comfortable and they're not showing that same anxiety response, but they more look like they're just ignoring you. So I sometimes see that with certain presentations or certain diagnoses that are co-occurring with selective mutism, or sometimes as they get older. So some of my clients may be, let's say, middle school or teenage years, and as I'm trying to engage them initially, they're looking at their phone and not making eye contact or paying attention to me. They're not communicating, so they're still in a shutdown mode, but they're doing so in a different presentation, a different manner. And that's important to recognize because one physically looks more anxious and the other doesn't seem as anxious, but yet they're still not comfortable to engage. So it's important to know that there's a difference in each stage. The same applies to stage 1, and we'll talk about the bridge as we see that visual come up in the presentation. But stage 1 on the bridge is when we're moving out of that shutdown mode and we're moving into a nonverbal communication mode. So the pointing, the nodding, the writing. Some children who have selective mutism and who are in that stage 1, they tend to be very slow to warm up. So they may give you a head nod, they may hand something to you or give you that thumbs up, but it comes with much hesitation. And so there's a lot of waiting for that child to finally engage. And so that could be they're a little longer to warm up, they're hesitating a bit more, or they're just slow to engage and it takes a few days or a few weeks for them to really start to engage. So you could think of your child at the start of the school year. If your child was one of those kids who came into the school year and just was not as comfortable, the teacher may have said it's taken a number of weeks for them to finally pass something, point to something, nod to something. They're in stage 1 of communication, but they're more of a slow warm up in that stage. Whereas some kids can be in stage 1 and they present quite differently. They're like a professional mime. That means if I were to look through a window into the classroom, this child might be engaging. They're like a class clown. They're pointing, they're showing, they've got lots of facial expressions. That student may still have selective mutism. They're still in stage 1 and they're pointing, nodding, gesturing, but yet they're really animate and very comfortable in their ability to nonverbally get your attention and explain what they need all through a nonverbal means. And so one stage, two different presentations. The same applies to stage 2. Stage 2 is what we call our transitional stage. It means between nonverbal and verbal, what happens in between. And that's what we call our transitional stage. It's like a bridge within the bridge. And so this might be a student who maybe they can't directly speak to their teacher, but if you were there at school with them, they may turn and tell you the answer. They'll use you as your verbal intermediary if you're the parent. But yet, for some children, they won't use a friend or a parent as a verbal intermediary at all. Instead, they may need to use sounds and a sound mechanism to help them move through into communication. One stage, two different presentations, and the same applies to stage 3. And stage 3 is what we call the verbal stage. Once your child moves across the bridge into stage 3 verbal, now they're using their voice. But yet again, there's different presentations of that. So one is they're hesitantly verbal. So someone asks them a question, there's a little more pause that's happening, and maybe a quiet, short answer comes. But for another child who might be in stage 3 verbal, they're actually very comfortable and they can actually begin to tell you full sentences or be and answer questions, but maybe they're just not as expressive. They don't share a lot. They have a hard time expanding their communication. So when we look at this, we can say one stage, but two different versions of how that child's communicating. And so one is not worse than the other. It really comes to show you that in the world of selective mutism, all your kids present a little differently. And there's a rhyme and reason behind that. And we need to know that because if we try to apply certain strategies to some of these presentations, we often will find that that student or that child pulls back, becomes more avoidant because we're not addressing some of the co occurring challenges, which brings me to some of the characteristics of SM. These things are important because as we talk about summer, we have to look back at this current school year and talk about how our child was presenting and what are we doing to track and plan ahead for the summer. So keep in mind that from a selective mutism standpoint, selective mutism is more than not speaking. There's so much more that goes into that. And if you have gone through the whole school year, you might be aware that yes, there were challenges with speaking, but there were some barriers to some other things too. And so when we look at these characteristics, we can see that many of our children with selective mutism have some social anxiety. They're cautious, they're timid when they come into communication, timid to even engage in certain activities in school. They may be slower to join into a group. If the teacher says move into groups for this activity, maybe certain special area classes, they have a harder time moving into anything that is a larger group atmosphere. Many of our kids need warm up time. So before they can jump into like a movement activity or jump right into, taking a seat in the lunchroom, they require more warm up time. Same may apply for coming to school in the morning. They may not be their best first thing in the morning or their most communicative. Many of our kids are hesitant to respond initially, and most kids with selective mutism have difficulty initiating. By this point of the school year, most teachers report if they've seen progress, responding has improved, depending on what stage of the bridge they're in. Where they are lacking is initiating and advocating. And so we can see that this plays a role as well. Um, and then we see below other challenges that do impact our kids with selective mutism. And we're looking at how they did this past year and looking in towards the summer and next fall. Did your child have any eating challenges? Were they eating in school, eating snack, eating lunch? Any bathroom challenges, using the bathroom at school at all or only certain bathrooms? And were there any sensory sensitivities? So many of our kids we find as a co occurring challenge is having either sensory processing disorder or just being a highly sensitive child. And that means the larger places in the school, auditorium, gym, cafeteria, can be more overwhelming when they have to participate. So if you notice this list, there are some components that aid to the speaking part of things, but there are other things here that are on this list that we say actually has nothing to do with talking, but yet my child did struggle with those things, participating, engaging, even if there was no verbal expectation, eating at school, using the bathroom at school, just not feeling comfortable in certain settings, having school avoidance. These things can all be part of that characteristics of SM. And it's important that we know that. So when we're looking at last school year and planning for summer, we have that in mind because that's going to be part of the goal planning. And you've heard me mention a few times co-occurring challenges. We talk about why does your student have selective mutism? One, you may have had some type of assessment done over the school year, which led to either a 504 plan or an IEP, which is wonderful. If you are still concerned that there's something maybe co-occurring for your child besides the selective mutism, having testing done is an important component. And the reason being is we sometimes see there are other factors that are playing into that child's selective mutism. So remember, selective mutism is like a symptom of other things that are happening. And so the boxes you see here on the screen, these are possibilities that we see when we do evaluations for many of our kids. And so there could be underlying co occurring things. So, for instance, just to give you an idea, if one of my clients has a speech and language delay and we haven't assessed for it quite yet, and we're wondering why they're not giving their opinion in class, they're not initiating conversation at lunch. Well, sometimes if you have an expressive language difficulty, the writing assignments can be very hard. Explaining yourself or giving your opinion can be challenging. And then certainly offering up conversation in the midst of the lunchroom, starting conversation with your friends can be challenged. And so that's why we go back and we do evaluation to see what else could be playing a role that is creating that barrier to your child's best communication. All of these things are important as sort of foundation to moving forward. And here is our social communication bridge. And as I was sharing, as you can see the different colors as we move across, when we work with children with selective mutism and talk about summer goals, one of the things we look for is looking at the bridge and seeing where that student was in different environments. So for you all, you may be looking at the bridge saying, I need to look back and say, where was my child this school year, at track? Or where were they with their primary teacher? How about their special area teachers? What about their peers in small group or large group? And so the important part is to know that one, if I did ask what stage of the bridge is your student currently, as they're wrapping up the school year, a common response is it depends. And it does depend because that's the selective nature of selective mutism, that your student can go through the school day and be in all of these stages. So to give you an example, you might have found this school year that maybe your child had a really difficult time in the morning. Transitions in the morning were harder, so they were less communicative at drop off or once they got into the school building. Maybe your student began the school day in stage 0 for the first month or 6 weeks of school, where they came in and were very shut down. But as the school day progressed and they felt more comfortable, they began to move into more stage 1, and they would respond to a peer that asked them a question through nodding, or respond to the teacher's questions with a hand raise or a nod. And then perhaps when they went into a small group, because maybe they met with the school counselor, for meetings, and with the school counselor, they were willing to do sound work, or they were able to record themselves and play it for the school counselor. That's all stage 2. Or they had a friend they were really comfortable with, and when they were paired with them in English class, your student could tell that friend the answer, and that friend could relay to the teacher. All of that falls under stage 2. But then when they went back into the large classroom, they bridged down to stage 1. And then when it was lunch or recess for our little ones, they moved up the bridge to stage 3. They were actually able to speak to some of their friends at recess when the teachers weren't as close and they weren't on the spot. So, as you can see, our kids can go through all different stages of the bridge and move up and down. The bridge is not necessarily linear. We do see kids moving up, and then depending on the environment, the person, their comfort, or the expectation of the task in front of them, they may bridge down and bridge back up again, depending on the strategies. So the bridge is a working document, and I love it because it allows you to see that, and for your child to see they are not stuck everywhere. There are pockets that they can bridge up and be more successful with their communication and be more comfortable, and other areas that they bridge down because there's something about that environment that's more uncomfortable for them. And so that's a great place then say that's why we need some strategies. So a task for you all as we move into summer is to take inventory of where your child was this school year. This is going to be our launching point for our summer strategies. You can see here on the screen, this is a blank bridge, and the blank bridge is terrific because it allows teachers at the end of the school year to take inventory of your child's progress. If your child has a 504 or an IEP, I always recommend in my school consults use the blank bridge and take inventory at the start of the school year to get a baseline, and maybe 2 or 3 times throughout the school year as you lean to the end, so you can see how that child has been progressing, what's changing. And that's really helpful for data collecting. It's also important for your child to see their progress and how they progressed, because sometimes our kids don't see it in the way we may. From every little step is a big step. And so where is your student now? So if you were to take this blank bridge tonight and say, let's take inventory, you may look and say, here's where my child progressed this school year with friends. and you might add those friends into that green column representing they were verbal. You may say which teachers did they cross the bridge with and become verbal with? Which ones did they remain in yellow? Maybe they need to use a whisper buddy, or you as the parent as a whisper buddy, or sound work. Or maybe they were nonverbal for in certain classes, or when they went to the nurse, or larger group activities. It's really important that we track that. The other part is tracking behaviors and other challenges, eating, even toileting, even attendance. So all these things are important because SM is more than just not speaking. It also has a lot to do with our comfort in engaging in social situations. So did your student at the beginning of the school year not engage as much? And then as the school year came to an end, they were passing things out and moving around the classroom. That's progress. So we don't want to just track the verbal progress, but the engagement and their comfort and how that changed over time. The same thing with using the bathroom. If your student didn't really use the bathroom that much during the school year, did they eventually start to with some strategies or help? And so those are things that we want to know because this is a great time of year to say, we ended this school year. What can we work on this summer to help us into the fall? So, as you see at the bottom of this sheet, I wrote the words fall regression. My child will have to start over again. And I put that there because I've experienced many parents at this time of the school year, even teachers say, man, we were making so much progress this school year, and now the school year is over and now we're gonna have to start from square one again in the fall. And so many teachers, many parents will say, I feel like they're going to now regress over the summer and have to start again in the fall. And I'm here to tell you, no, no, we don't have to do that at all. So fall regression as we move into the fall, I like to view it and say the summer is your time to restructure your goals and to pump their muscles, their communication muscles, to get them ready for the fall. And that doesn't mean that they lose all their skills. So I usually give the analogy and say, for any of you who know how to ride a bike and you ever learned how to ride a bike or learn to swim, you may have learned that when you were very young and did it a lot. I know for me, I have a beach cruiser, and I remember when I got that for Mother's Day for my kids. Was so excited because I love to ride my bike everywhere, and I could not wait to ride it. And I realized it's been a couple years since I rode a bike, and I used to ride my bikes all the time as a kid. It was very comfortable and confident. No hands sometimes, right? Balancing. And here I am riding a bike again. And to be honest, when I first got on the bike, I had to like regain my core and get my muscles going. But then I picked right up because I never forgot how to ride the bike. I just hadn't had the practice. So if you can think about that with your kids, that over the summer, they're not forgetting the skills they learned all this school year. They are going to have a season where they're not going to be practicing them as much in that environment, which is why we're going to practice over the summer. But they're going to come back into the fall. And yes, they're not going to lose their skill. They're not going to be as well practiced in this environment. So don't think of it as a loss. Just think of it as they are shifting gears and they're not going to be in the same environment as thoroughly. So they're not going to have that same level of confidence and comfort. So what can we do about that? One, we can recognize as parents or educators, whoever's participating tonight, is to recognize that next school year, when they come in and they're not as comfortable and not as engaged, it's not a regression. It makes sense because selective mutism is selective. It's selective per the person, per the environment, per the expectation. New school years are full of new people, new classrooms, new teachers, and new expectations. So it makes sense that in this newness, they're not going to be as strong and comfortable. But that doesn't mean they forget their skills. They just need to use those skills again. And so my hope is that as we move forward this summer, we'll build those skills so when they come back in the fall, we're pumping their muscle to get them better primed for the beginning of the school year. So a couple things to be mindful of. For many of you, you might have ended your school year already, and for some, you're in the last day or so, or last few days of school. So I just want to propose this to you. And if you have already ended school, do not worry. You are then prepared for next year ending because you have a couple tips. Things that I would say are really important as we close out the school year is to remember transition plans. So transition plans are things that we can do in the spring to close out the school year so we're better prepared for next school year. What does that mean? Visit your child's classrooms that they might have in terms of next year's teachers. And I know what some of you may say, well, we don't know who our child's teacher will be. That's okay. Oftentimes, if you have, let's say, a third grader, you know, there's 4 different third grade teachers they may have. Really important that as part of an accommodation plan, your classroom teachers say, let's go visit the fourth grade hall. Let's go into each of those fourth grade classrooms. Let's meet those fourth grade teachers. Just building familiarity is a stepping stone to next year. I know that teacher. Now we can't always plan for new teachers that may come into the school, but we can do our due diligence to try to get more comfort. If there's going to be new support staff, like a new counselor or speech pathologist that we're going to be working with, that's an important piece too, is before the school year ends, have your child get to know them to transition. And the important part of having a parent or a teacher or a friend or buddy with them is that if your student has crossed the bridge with another friend or with you, they can speak to you at school. It's important that we say, not only am I building comfort with these new teachers, but I have somebody to be that verbal intermediary. So if I wanted to facilitate strategies to build comfort, if I can speak to this peer, perhaps this new staff person could ask my child and their buddy one or two, familiar questions. And my child could be prompted to tell their friend, and that friend relay that answer. So, getting to know people now is important. Here's why: your child is the most comfortable at this point of the school year. They've already been through all the ups and downs, the absences, the holidays, the substitutes. They've been through all of it this school year, and they've acclimated. So, introduce them to new people while they're at their most comfortable is a great way to build for the fall. Secure peer relationships. So before school year ends, any friends that they really grew comfortable with that you want to exchange information with parents or help them to have connection with them is super important because we want to work that into our summer. Um, Request teachers and peers for next year. So if that's part of your accommodation plan, requesting a teacher. So for our elementary, it might be a teacher who's a really good fit for your child and their presentation of SM. If it's peers, if your student became comfortable with two or three or four kids this school year, asking for two or three of those to possibly be put in the classroom with them, especially if they verbalized, is going to be really important. And then extended school year. Is extended school year a possibility? For some kids, it may not be, but extended school year, sometimes if you have an accommodation plan, can be offered to you. So extended school year at some schools is a great way to carry out goals over the summer because the extended school year program is shorter days. They introduce more loose or fun activities, and it's a smaller grouping of kids, and communication can build. And sometimes our support staff are helping with extended school year, so they may know someone to help bring them into communication in a very relaxed setting. So those are some things that if you have time before the school year ends, great. And if you are already past that point, tuck this in your hat for this coming school year, and you're ahead of the game to making sure that you're doing this as the end of the school year comes. So, as we talk about summer plans, you all may have very different summer plans this school year, and that's okay. Summer plans may include things like vacations and summer camps, just hanging out with friends, or being out running errands and doing things in your community, getting ice cream, going to parks. It could be going to your local pool or just spending time with family, or maybe family members are watching, giving care to your children as you're away. So, a couple things that are important here is to remember that when we're looking at all of these very fun, desirable activities, the other part that's really great is to keep in mind that, again, because presentation matters, is that the summertime brings transition. So there's a change of pace, there is a change of schedule, there is a change of structure. And all of those things for some kids, depending on how they present, is not super comfortable for them. They have a harder time moving into new activities when these things are not feeling as comfortable and predictable. So presentation matters. And as we work through some of these strategies for summer, maybe creating some structure and scheduling is helpful for some of your kids. Maybe not for all, but for some it may be. So as we look at some of the summer goals, things I want you to keep in mind, we do want to look for creating structure. And how do we create structure? Structure for some kids may look like keeping a schedule. I bring this up at a lot of our parent trainings at Communicamp because many of our parents the kids don't have their own schedule, their own calendar of events. We may keep a calendar on our phone, or you might have a physical calendar you keep, but for some of our kids, they don't have a calendar of their own. Having a summer planner that goes up on a wall or as a big whiteboard in your kitchen where your child can see their events in a specific color can be very helpful, because as summer becomes a little more loose, we can create some structure. So that might mean, hey, in the morning, we're going to do some chores. We're going to do some reading. We might move to do camp on certain days, or pool on certain days, or, um, you know, down days where we're just around the house. But seeing it creates bookends, and that can help kids if they feel a little too loose in the summer and behaviorally they're not feeling comfortable. Anxiety can go up. Creating some structure is important. Providing inner control. So inner control is key. We all need it as adults sometimes to feel like I know what I'm doing. For instance, I feel inner control because I have my PowerPoint in front of me. Some of your kids do better when they feel inner control of, I need to see what camp I'm picking, or I need to see the camp schedule. What time are we going to this? We're going on vacation. When are we leaving? How many days until that time? What do we need to do to work up to that? So inner control uses a lot of visuals, planning. It helps that child to feel more comfortable. You will see that as we walk through some of the goals. Tracking your goals and having a child being able to track with you can sometimes create inner control for them too. The same would apply for the bridge. Being able to have a childlike version of the bridge where they can see that they're moving across the bridge is also a really great way. Facilitating goals, whether you're in school or out of school, we have opportunities over the summer. If you go to an ice cream place, if you're going to the pool, if you're going on vacation, driving or taking a plane, there are opportunities to facilitate social communication goals. And so we want to make sure we're doing that. We want to look for ways to increase comfort while we're working on these things. And certainly we want to have fun. We don't want the whole summer to be working. So as we talk about vacations, vacations are important. So when we have a child with selective mutism going out and about, two things to keep in mind. One, are they a comfy traveler or a timid traveler? And this comes back to your presentation. Some of your kids have a higher sense of expectation, and others have a lower sense of expectation. So, what do I mean by this? Some of your kids, when you guys go on vacation, you may be the parent that says, as soon as we're out of our normal routine, my child's not comfortable. So they may not feel as secure. They're in a new city, the new restaurants. Maybe you're staying in a hotel and it doesn't feel, their bed doesn't feel like this bed, and so that can make a child feel really uncomfortable. And they can be more of a timid traveler. So when they're out and about at restaurants or stores, they're a little more hesitant, not as comfortable. If they're visiting family while they're on vacation, that could be where they're much more timid to engage with family who they haven't seen in a while. Um, but on the other end, you could have a comfy traveler. And some of you have kids that when you go on vacation, as soon as they're out of the area, they're walking onto the airplane and they're asked the security asks a question and they verbalize. They go to a hotel and they're able to say, what time is the pool staying, the pool open till? And all of a sudden they're verbalizing in places and very comfortable in their interactions. And that really goes to show you that some kids are more comfortable with the idea of, I'm away from the area that I typically feel higher expectation in, where everyone knows me. They know me as maybe I'm the child who doesn't talk as much, doesn't come into communication as much. So when they're out of that environment, their expectation is reduced and they feel more comfortable. No one knows me around here. And so they feel more comfortable coming into conversation. And it's not always that direct and cognitive. Not every child is working through that cognitively, but there is an expectation that doesn't feel as high versus a child who is more of a timid traveler. They really need that familiarity and comfort. They're out of their routine, and familiarity helps them to come into communication. So something to be mindful when you're going out. Another part is warming up. When we're going to go to familiar places on vacation. So when we are going on vacation, really important pieces for many kids with selective mutism is surprises don't always feel well for many of them. And so bringing them into that inner control and structure is getting them warmed up. So warm up might mean I want them to feel familiar with this environment before we go. So we do a lot of research. We look online, we look at pictures, we look at the hotel that we may be staying at. So we start to look at those things. We plan out and map out what are the things we're going to do in the area. All of those things help to bring familiarity. So if I can watch a video online about it, if I can see the hotel, can I take a tour of the hotel? Can I take a tour of that area that we're going to be visiting? Can we, warm up and play airplane before we go on a trip so I can be thinking through what I'm going to experience? All of those are ways to warm up if you have a child who's more of that timid, nervous traveler. When we are preparing and having that inner control, we do a lot of facilitation of activities as goal work out in the community. So one of those would mean help them prepare a shopping list and going out to the stores. And so what do we do when we're out there? We facilitate social communication goals. So if I'm preparing a list of all the things I need to go on vacation, can I take that list and turn it into a social communication goal where as I go out, maybe I'm helping my parent find those things in a store and I'm handing them to the store clerk to ring up. I'm passing over the money. We call that handover takeover. That stimulates social communication. If we're working on bringing this child into more communication, let's say we're looking in a store, we want to work on initiation skills. I might say, hey, these are the three things we need. We're going backpacking. We need a backpack, a hydration backpack for the hike we're going to do out in Arizona. We might go to the sporting goods store and approach a clerk, and you, as the parent, may say, hi, can you help us find something? And because your child has something written on a list that they feel in control of, we could then say, Jen, what are we looking for? Are we looking for sneakers or a backpack? Tell me. And maybe your child can turn to you and say, backpack. And they tell you backpack, and you relay it to the server or to the customer service person. And that's helping them to come into stage 2 on the bridge. And let's say they're audible and the clerk says, backpacks, yeah, we have them over here. What kind of backpack are you looking for? And maybe you do it again. Are we looking for a regular backpack or hydration backpack? And they tell you again, and you relay it, that's stage 2. Or your child says it a little louder and the customer service person hears, oh, hydration backpacks. Your child is now starting to become verbal with that person because they're being audible to that clerk. So even the preparation of making a list and planning for a going away on vacation can become a real world strategy and goal to help with communication. So you're giving comfort, we're warming up, we're feeling inner control, and now we're working on strategies to grow communication. The same thing can apply for if we're creating action plans. And action plans are just a way that we say, how can we write down and formulate a way that we look at the event that's coming up for our child and talk about where are we going, when are we going, and who will we see, and then what will they ask us? And by planning out conversation at a family member's home or a hotel or while we're sightseeing or at a new restaurant, we get to help our child feel more in control by scripting out communication and remembering the bridge says, if my child is not comfortable verbalizing, how can I help them feel more comfortable, have more inner control, and be there to facilitate communication? So we're warming them up in all these environments. And now we're creating lists, we're creating what questions might be asked of me. So if I'm in a hotel and I walk up to the desk, the hotel concierge may ask us, where are you traveling from? That might be a question that we write down when we go to the hotel. What are hotels? What might they ask us when we go to the hotel? Or, how many people? Or what is your last name? And if I can help my child prepare for some of those, I can attempt bringing them into communication on the bridge. If they can be verbal and I can say, what is our last name? And they can tell, great. If I say, what is our last name? Is it Smith or is it Curry? And then they tell me and I relay, then they're in stage 2. And if it's too hard, I can say, is our last name Smith? And your child shakes their head, and now they're non-verbally engaging. There are goals to be worked on everywhere we go, but preparing for vacation sometimes means taking those extra steps. The other part to be mindful of is with presentation is when do we go places? So when we are going on vacation, we have to be mindful that we could really have a lot planned, a lot of sightseeing, a lot of engagement going on. And so might need to go out places on off-peak times. And off-peak times means they're not as large. I'm going to put an L up here. They're not as large, loud, or lots of people. And sometimes those three L's can be very overwhelming for our children with selective mutism. So picking off peak times that they can go out and do things makes them feel more comfortable. One, and two, don't be surprised if some of your kids, you want to get out there and practice things and they need some downtime because many of us need time to refresh, refuel before we can go back out and do things. And so be mindful of your child's presentation and what things are high interest to them. So on your on vacation, you may have some things that are high interest to you, but also finding some things that are high interest to them as well, because often they engage more. So for instance, if you're visiting family in Texas or Nashville and you're doing some things with family, knowing that, oh, there's like a Taylor Swift exhibit, happening there too, and your child loves that, that may be the fuel to help them come into communication with your relatives that you're visiting because there's questions of, oh, Jen, where did we want to go tomorrow? And I say, who was it we're going to see again? Is it Sabrina Carpenter or the Taylor Swift Museum? And that's bringing them into communication. And so we want to really look at vacations as fun, but it's not a time to take our foot off the gas. We want to make sure we're building comfort with preparation, but we also want to make sure we're working on strategies. The same may apply with theme parks. So if you're traveling to Disney or local amusement parks, we have to be mindful. Those environments are a lot of those three L's, those large, loud, lots of people environments. Now, some of your children do great in those environments because you don't have to come into direct communication with anyone in those environments. You're doing actions, you're doing activities, but be mindful that some of our kids need more control and feeling less anxious in those environments. So things to be mindful of. Warm up by mapping out and planning. So giving your child more inner control to pick the rides or the places they want to see to go in that order. Giving them a map to hold and be in charge of brings them more independence and they feel more in control. And so that can be very helpful. Bring a friend with them. So if you're going to theme parks and you can bring a friend, that can be helpful because if they're older, for instance, if I have a client who's 15 and they're bringing a friend, I might be able to task them with here's your card to get food or snacks, meet us back here at this time. And believe it or not, the older our kids get with selective mutism, they may sometimes begin to verbalize more when they're doing things independently with a peer next to them versus their whole family. And I mean, going up to, like a food cart or a restaurant to order something, sometimes our kids are less comfortable as they move into that middle school and high school age to do the ordering in front of us as their parents, but they would do it in front of a peer. And so we could definitely bring a friend that brings comfort. It warms them up. They don't have to share, they don't have to be in the social limelight. If engaged by someone, they can share it with a peer. And again, we don't want to miss out on goals. So goals for restaurant ordering, or those asking questions, having a list, and thinking of questions to ask when we're out at places and doing handover takeover are part of the goals that we work on thinking of your social communication bridge. If we were going to a place like Disney and there's characters, things to be mindful of. Sometimes characters, like there's a picture here, sometimes they're speaking characters, and other times they're not speaking. But our kids can be intimidated to take pictures with these large, oversized characters. So things to be mindful of is practicing walking up and doing, high fives or fist bumps. Sometimes giving a character something is an extension of ourselves and makes them more comfortable. If we're a little hesitant to be in a photo, oftentimes we might have to ask the child to be the photographer for us. So let's say your child is like, I'm not going anywhere near Goofy or Mickey, and it scares them to go up close, so they feel embarrassed. Another part could be, how about you take the pictures, or you hold the phone and do the selfies with these individuals, so the family's involved, and that can make it more comfortable in doing these theme park adventures. Best times to go, again, off-peak times where there's less people, where it's a little calmer, not as noisy. That can be very helpful for our kids with selective mutism. And then also having a safety plan. So before we go places on vacation, whether it's, we're traveling outside of the country, going to another state, flying, or even at a theme park, having ways that you keep your child safe. And this is important for some of our kids to know because they worry when they travel. What if I get separated from you? So if you have an older child, they may have their phone and you can connect with them over their phone. But for our younger children, we may need ways to have them feel safe. So that might mean having an air tag that we keep with your child when you go to these places, or simple things that I have up on the screen too. You can order off of, a website, just wristbands that you get for a concert, or these plastic wristbands, and with a Sharpie, you can write important information on there. It can have something about, nonverbal, and here's some information. There are also wristbands that connect to an app that have your information that can track. I always highly recommend create an action plan and safety plan with your child that says when we go to these places, if we don't want to rely on, I hope if there was an emergency you would say something. Instead, we want to work through, if there was a place that a time you were separated from me, here's where you go. Here's what you show with your communication or have on you that you can point to, and what you do in that moment. And so those are important parts of planning for trips. And remember, the bridge is what helps dictate our goals in these environments. What can we do? Hand over, take over, which is just the experience of I'm going up and handing and taking. I'm paying, I'm taking the change. I'm giving the card, I'm taking the food. I'm giving the card, I'm taking the gift. Whatever those interactions are, the fist pumps, the handshakes, the high fives, they are stimulating your child's social communication pathway. So on vacations, if there's opportunities, you could be stimulating through buying and taking and showing your ID or passes for things. Those are all really important things to keep your child engaged and stimulated, and then look for opportunities to use the bridge to come into communication. Now, camps are a tricky one. And remember, summer is loose. And so when we are coming into camps, we often worry, what if my child doesn't speak at camp? And that makes sense because camp is not quite like school, especially if you're trying out camps that are not related to your school. If you're not rolling into a camp that's designated as like part of your extended school year, or a camp that's like daycare, preschool that rolls over from the school year. These are camps that are offered in the community, which means that these can be kids that your child's not familiar with. These are adults your child is not familiar with. And sometimes the director is the person you're speaking to, but it might be younger individuals who are actually the counselors who are facilitating. And we may not be able to rely on these type of facilitators to know our goals, and to utilize our 504 plan like we would in the school year. So what can we do when it comes to camps? One, if we don't have any camps picked, or keeping it loose and we haven't signed our child up for camp, again, knowing your child is important. And so that's where we have to look and say, we really need to find opportunities that we can engage in smaller camps. That's an important one. So a smaller camp, camps where there's a higher interest for our kids, that's going to be really important. If we know someone who's already attending, like a friend, that's going to be equally as important. Sorry, I'm grabbing my charger. That's equally going to be as important for our kids. So attempt to go to camp with someone. So when your child can go to camp with a friend, it helps to stimulate their communication. If I know that, Sarah and I went to school together and we both love art and we're both going to art camp, I have a built-in buddy. And that's really important, to attempt at all costs to have someone come that your child is comfortable and possibly verbal with, that you can have facilitate play dates over the summer with, and then bring that person into camp with you. Being able to carpool with those peers to and from camp is like an added layer of helping them communicate. Many kids feel more comfortable coming into communication when they're seeing that peer more frequently. And also, if they're carpooling and not sitting staring at that friend, parents can often ask questions to the kids, whether they're in the back or facing forward, where they're not looking at each other, and have an easier time coming into communication where they don't feel that high sense of expectation. And so, those are important pieces that we want to look at. If it comes time to educate camp directors, camp directors, we do want to have a way to educate them that your child has selective mutism, but what does that mean? And so that's why going back to taking inventory of where your child landed at the end of the school year is so important, because it is important to say to this director, my child has selective mutism, and here's the definition, here's what it is. And we talked about that, but also here's how they started the school year and here's where we ended. So they have grown in their comfort. Here's what they can do in terms of their communication. This is a new environment, so they could bridge down, but here's what we can do to help them. And so what we want to do is educate about their communication style. How do they communicate best? If they're bringing a friend, if they have a friend coming and they can use that friend as a verbal intermediary, we want to educate, please partner them with Sarah as much as possible so they can they can tell Sarah answers and they can tell the camp counselors their needs. If we know that they have a hard time using public bathrooms or new bathrooms, can we ask to come over to the camp once or twice during other sessions to see the bathrooms, familiarize ourselves with them, even use the bathroom before camp begins or after camp lets out, and put together a plan if we need to. And then we action plan. And action plan again asks, let's do this together, Jen. Where are we going? We're going to camp. And when will it be? In our control and structure. Who will be there? The director, the camp counselors, peers. And then we say, what might they ask you? So we're preparing for those common questions that they may ask and preparing what our answer would be. And even though we may not be able to verbalize the answer, if we're feeling comfortable and if your student is at that place of, I'm starting to verbalize more, by preparing the question, preparing the answer, visually they see it and process it, they may be better able to respond verbally when they are in that situation. If they're not able to verbalize, and can we use a verbal intermediary? That's another step. And if we don't have a verbal intermediary, can we bridge down to at least nonverbal, where I'm able to nod or point or write my answer if needed? And so action planning is super important before camp so that we're getting them set up for the best scenario when they move forward. And then lastly,
Jennifer, so,
yeah,
oh, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt your last point. Just wanted to give you a heads up on time that we're just
yeah,
about at 10 minutes.
perfect. Thanks, Kristen.
You're welcome.
And the last part is there's in parentheses, it talks about all about my child. There's a document that we use when you're looking to educate camp directors. If you're going on vacation, you're educating family you've been seeing in a while. It really talks about putting a picture together and what your child's experiencing in terms of their selective mutism and what their SM looks like compared to another child. So my child can do this, but has a hard time with this. We lead with what your child is great at and the things that they love to do. And that communication can be hard. So having a sample of that to write out to give to family members, new child care providers, camp directors, really important to have something where either your younger children, you can write it on behalf of them. And if you have older children with SM, they can write it. So it comes from their perspective of having SM and what could be helpful. So what can the camp directors do? What can those new class leaders do to help your child feel more comfortable or not call them out or help them with their current goals? When it comes to spending time over the summer with buddies, if you're just having play dates or hangouts with friends, um, important to recognize that where does your child feel the most comfortable doing so? Ideally, being at your home is the most comfortable place because they know their space. And that is more comfortable than someone else's house in the beginning. But certainly, house, park, pool, the school grounds. What are you bringing with you to engage? Because a lot of kids feel more comfortable when they have something to focus on. And how do we facilitate, which means using the bridge, and parent has to be the one to bring into communication. And so if I was sitting, hanging out with, friends doing a craft or an activity, I would want to facilitate and say, Jen, what colored paint do you want to use next? And have them tell me, Sarah, do you want to use this or this color glitter in doing the activity? So activities produce and facilitate communication, and group size matters. I always say, there's that phrase, two is company and three is a crowd. Sometimes if you have two outgoing kids and your child is having a harder time engaging, the two outgoing ones tend to move together and yours might be, not as engaged. So looking at groups of two or four, keeping even numbers in the beginning, or parent serves to help facilitate is helpful. And then educating parents about your child's SM and getting together. That all about my child sheet is important for other parents too. But again, not every parent needs to know every detail of what you're working on. So that's important. And as we begin to wrap up, we'll talk about just the pool. Pool opportunities are a great way to engage. Don't miss out on things like bringing a friend to the pool so you have communication and comfort. Bring activities. Activities are the focal point. So if you are bringing a game, a board game to do while they're sitting in the grass, if you're bringing cards, bubbles, extra snacks, all of these things are things that when you're not in the pool and they're sitting, it draws attention for other kids to come and join your child and they might want to engage. And there's the focus of asking, because you're the facilitator, asking questions about these things to bring your child into communication. If you're going in the pool, bringing pool games, creating gentle competition, like racing to and from, highest jump off the diving board, creating ways that you're counting and the focus is not on, hey, talk to this friend, tell her your name, but instead do the activity and build questions out of the activity. Super important for that. The facilitation is key. And then the last piece that I want to make sure we cover is as we're thinking about school grounds, do get onto school grounds over the summer. It is so important that we spend time on the school property. If we have left the school year and we've made progress, we don't want to lose that momentum. How can we get on school grounds? One, go off peak times. So, if you're there on a Saturday, if there's still like teacher meetings happening, please get onto the school playground and the school grounds because the more your child speaks to you as parent, facilitator, support staff, when no one else is around, you're creating that concrete idea that I can speak on school grounds when no one else is around, when it's just my parents. We want to reduce that expectation and give them a way to see themselves across the bridge because the cognitive piece of treatment is knowing I can do this when I have these things here or not here. If they can use their voice on school grounds with a family member or siblings, that's one step of them being verbal at school. If they can do it with a play date or hanging out on school grounds, if they have older kids and you're going to go walk or run or shoot hoops on the school playground, or if they're older, they're learning to drive. All of these things are helpful to see themselves verbal. So please spend time on the school grounds over the summer. That'll be an important component of getting there and using your voice and visit the school. If the school allows you to come in over the summer, drop off paperwork, meet with staff, tour the classrooms, use bathrooms over the school year over the summer because if they're unfamiliar with bathrooms and many kids have toileting challenges, this is the time to do that and practice when no one else is there. The cafeteria, the gym, become comfortable and familiar, and then we begin to move into those communication goals. So as we close, some things that I won't share today, but I did put here are if your child is in different stages, what are the possible whys for that? So if they're stuck in stage 0, why? If they're stuck in stage 1, what could be the reason and what can we do? If they're in stage 2, what can we do to progress? And if they're in stage 3, what can we do to progress? And so some different visuals to help you see what those strategies may look like. So I'll pause here as we do a brief question answer about any of the items that we talked about. So Kristen, I'll answer some questions now if that's okay.
Absolutely.
Terrific. And so I'll start with the Q&A first because there's a few questions there. How do we make friends with kids in the neighborhood that have been, contaminated? My son no longer wants to hang out with the neighbors that he was in class with as he identified at school when he was mute. Great question. To be honest, so a lot of kids become very, I say, conditioned in their behavior, which means once they've sort of been mute for a long time, they're known as that kid that doesn't talk. And so, a couple things. One is that I often in treatment, I do two things. One, if there are activities, camps, activities that we can move into making new friendships, we want to, right? So, okay, neighborhood friends are great, but we have to start with some new friends. But we don't want to forget that area because there are some ways to work through it. Not all, I rarely use the word contaminated, but I use conditioned. We become conditioned to not speak, and there's fear. I've been seen this way. So if I did speak to these kids, what would they say? They would like make a big deal about it. Like, oh, Jeremy's talking. And so a couple things I do from a treatment perspective. One is I often when I'm working with kids, if there is a reason to hang out with these kids because I'm going to see them in class or I'm going to see them in the neighborhood and I kind of want to be around them, but I'm not sure. I often in treatment start to think about the times I do spend outside where these kids may be present. Do I have any overlapping activities with them? And I do something cognitively. I often will share with kids in session, like I'll say, "Hey, do you remember the first time you got this really great gift?" Let's say it was their cell phone. "Do you remember the first time you got your cell phone? How excited were you? You came down the steps, you opened that gift, and it was your first cell phone, and you were like floored, so excited, beyond excited, right? And you showed that excitement. And then the next day you came downstairs and there it was on the counter and you were like, man, that's so awesome. But not quite as excited you were when you first got it. And then a month later you had it and you were surely glad you had it, but you weren't as excited about it as you were the first day you got it. And then fast forward, how long have you had your phone? Oh, a year. And do you wake up in the morning like, oh my gosh, my phone? No, that excitement has passed, but you're glad that you have it. And I often will share that when working on goals, that sometimes that's the way it looks, that when someone first hears us speak, it's like, whoa, Jeremy is talking. I haven't heard him speak. Oh my gosh, it's a big deal. And then after they know you do, it's like, well, I'm glad you are, but it's not as exciting. And then it becomes more routine. And then the excitement goes away and the expectation goes away. And so, yes, make friends with new people in new environments where he can see himself different or she can see herself different. But the other part is, how can we help the cognitive piece that is also a barrier? So those are two pieces that I would say would be important. My child regressed a ton this year. The special education teacher saw his muting as oppositional. And then potentially disruptive to himself. Also, my experience, IEPs are difficult to navigate when SM is not accompanied with a learning disability. So how do we work with untrained staff? So one is we do a lot of work with staff. So my role specifically at the center is doing a lot of parent education. And so if you are working with a treatment professional that can do parent education, do education in the school, we really want to better understand those whys of SM. Part of my slides, there'll be a document that says why SM that you can utilize. Sometimes staff has to be trained on SM is not, I'm choosing to not speak, but there are reasons I have developed it and why it's maintaining and what those underlying components are. And if we recognize that maybe there's some sensory challenges, there may be some learning difficulties, maybe there's no learning difficulties, but I feel a ton of expectation. And so I shut down when I feel too much pressure. Staff can better understand where it's coming from. So I would say the why of SM document, very helpful. And yes, if you have not done an educational training, really important that we put in the IEP or a 504 plan that all new staff be part of those trainings so we don't see it as oppositional. I can say in all the years I've been at the Smart Center, I don't think I've ever diagnosed anyone with opposition, but I've seen type of behaviors, but usually they're coming from somewhere. And a big part of where many come from are that I feel such a high expectation and either speech and language wise, I can't express myself. I don't have appropriate emotional regulation, or I have felt tricked into speaking, pressured to speak, and I'm avoiding. And so we can address them through that Y of SM document to better help. So those would be some ways that I would move forward. What type of question could we ask to encourage speech when carpooling? This is a great question. Action planning is important. Action planning might mean you bring your child into, hey, we're working on this goal with this friend. And so we can either do what we call like nonchalant informal goals, which would be, what if we just do some fun questions in the car? So maybe I'm driving and the kids are in the back, and maybe I start by asking them questions and get them to answer first. So maybe I do some trivia. Maybe I do some fun topics. If I have young kids, I'm asking Pokemon questions. I'm asking, musical questions if they like certain shows, and I'm getting them to verbally respond to me first. Once they're verbally responding to me as the parent, maybe in gentle competition, fun games, then I can maybe move into the goal of showing that child how they were able to verbalize or come into communication. And then we start to work on the goal of what would it feel like to speak directly to that child? What would be some of the questions we could ask? And many times kids need us to facilitate. What I mean by that is I might want my child to say, to their friend, Timmy, what camp are you doing? Maybe that's the question I want my child to ask, but my child just can't. So I might then facilitate and start the sentence and bring my child into the conversation. I might start and say, oh, Timmy, we had a question that we were wondering. What was it again, James? Did we want to know where he was going on vacation or what camp he was going to? And maybe your child can say, what camp? And that's the wording that they can use. And they're starting to ask the question, but you're starting it and they're bring in the rear. They're finishing your sentence. That would be a way to start asking questions, and then maybe asking, how does it feel to maybe use your words with this friend, and what can we do to help that? So one, what if I ask questions and you could tell me? Or what if I ask questions and you both got to answer? Some of our kids do well. Again, presentation matters. If they like structure, inner control, they might want to feel more in control of the interaction. And for some kids, if you bring up, let's do, they immediately feel high expectation and back off. And in those cases, we have to do what we call silent goals. Silent goals are we as the parent know we're going to look for little ways to bring the kids into communication, but we're not going to start off with asking our child directly, let's make it a goal, or I'll give you reward for this goal because they're not ready for it yet. So just some thoughts there with some of those questions. Um, how can we figure out the why of SM? Yes. So oftentimes we do at our center, we do an intensive evaluation or an SM evaluation. We review the why. We do some screening questions to rule in and rule out some of those contributing factors like sensory or speech and language or learning difficulties. And so that helps us to better see the why and to apply the right pieces and the right care. Some of our kids need co-occurring speech and language. They need co-occurring occupational therapy. So we want to make sure that we're giving the right guidance and how do we like a puzzle put all those pieces together so it's not disjointed of this therapy, that therapy, and another, but work together collaboratively. How important is to have an intermediary in sliding in sessions with teachers? It depends. I would say my goal for our students are I want to help them move across the social communication bridge. And if my child is really stuck in nonverbal, my next step is I have to choose some way to move them across the bridge and help them to move across the bridge. What are my options? One is can they use somebody as a verbal intermediary to get communication going? And if the answer is yes, I want to use that. If they're really stuck and not able to verbalize, I want to use more of like a sound approach. And you'll see there's a slide in here with different sound games. Sometimes utterances and sounds are important. It's how a child begins to be heard without saying words. And so if I can use sounds as a good approach, great. I might use that in conjunction with a verbal intermediary. I also might use recording and sending recordings in. But I would say if your child will use you as a verbal intermediary, like they're willing to. Some kids are hesitant, but it's if you find that your child is telling you answers in front of the teacher, I think that's a great strategy because with comfort of doing that, your child's voice level tends to go up in time when they have a normalized sense of expectation. So for instance, if your teacher was asking you summer related questions, like, Jen, where are you guys going on vacation this summer? And mom was there, and mom or dad said, oh, are we going to Disney or are we going to Arizona? And your child said, Arizona. If the teacher overhears it, the teacher doesn't have to say, I heard you, Jen. I heard your voice. But the teacher could just repeat that and say, "Oh, Arizona. That's awesome. I've never been out there before. Oh, and who are you driving or flying?" Child turns to parent and says, "Flying." Teacher hears it. Flying. That's awesome. Your child is starting to go from stage two, which is why we need the verbal intermediary. But through these very relaxed, repetitive questions, we're looking for the signs that they're ready to move into verbal. And just by overhearing your child, we can confirm the answers, and that's helping them to know that the teacher's hearing me but not making a big deal about things. And that's a helping strategy. So that's why having a verbal intermediary can be really important. It's not just to keep quiet speech going where no one else is included. We actually want to create a social communication triangle. Your child, you, and the third party asking questions. The goal is to get that moving. So we're taking our verbal where it's comfortable and sharing it or passing the baton. And so a verbal intermediary can be really important. And then my child is attending camp at a preschool. Some of the regular teachers work on select weeks, and some are new teachers. We're wondering if we should send our daughter on weeks where they're new staff or focus on doing play dates at home. We're making great progress and wonder if the staff might create regression. Couple things. Oh, and we'll be a new teacher, and we are traveling to Philly for community camp. I would love if you traveled to community camp. That would be wonderful to meet you in person. But the other part is you have to make that decision for your child. Um, you want to set your child up for like the right next step. So sometimes going to a camp where they're already familiar and know the teachers and can keep that momentum going is key. Is it wrong to maybe throw in a week where they don't know somebody? No, because remember, this isn't about like we got to get it right all the time. It's about setting them up and really pumping their comfort and their muscles where it's easy first. And as they're building the skill, little by little, bringing in things that are a little more challenging to them, right? And knowing, and this is where it's important for all of you who are parents, your expectation of your child's progress is important. We have to check that because sometimes we go in to say, well, my child verbalized all year long and did great. Now we should go to camp and do the same thing. Our expectation may be they did great in this environment, that they were really comfortable and had practice and consistency. And now we're going into a newer setup, a newer environment with some familiarity, but there's some newness. So I expect my child might bridge down, but I can talk with them about it. We come up with some strategies and give the teacher strategies that bridging down doesn't mean regression. And so I would say, yeah, go with the places that we're feeling really comfortable. And if you're finding that she's doing well, maybe adding in some activities that are not as comfortable so we can work those strategies. Because the whole idea of the approach is not to steer away from the hard things, but start with the easy and what becomes easy and then grow into the more challenging things. And playdates are always wonderful. Kristen, how are we doing? We have a lot of questions. How are we doing on time? What do you think? I can
Let's
wrap up
see,
if you like.
maybe wrap up about 8:15.
Okay,
Okay.
terrific. Yeah. Um, why do you recommend, what do you recommend when school refuses to let your team with SM meet teachers before the first day of school? Ooh, that is tricky. One is I'm a big believer in school consultations and trainings because sometimes um, we can logistically and contractually, there can be some challenges. And I think it's good to talk about, well, what are our options? So sometimes we can't get in to meet all the teachers beforehand. Um, and it depends what we're asking for. So uh, there can be times where if for instance, new school year, new peers, our new students are coming in and meeting their teachers or taking tours. Oftentimes I'll say, can my child come in and take a tour of the wing of the school they're going to be in or just where their classes are going to be ahead of time? And if there may be teachers setting up in their classrooms, are we allowed just to pop in just to say hello? Contractually, we don't have to sit and do a whole, meet and greet or communication task, but can we at least come in and tour? And if anyone's there, can we have time with them? Contractually, some schools they don't have to permit before school begins activities like that. However, if you have an accommodation plan, depending on the state that you're in, sometimes schools, part of that accommodation plan, if we know it's a written accommodation that in those, like again, in those smaller groups, more one-on-one settings, that's where we can develop that comfort and rapport. We can build from there. And I would say, one, we want to check your accommodation plan. Two, have we done a training to better educate the staff to understand why it's so important that it's not a parent just trying to, I always feel like sometimes it's like, parents want certain things that the school doesn't want to provide, but how beneficial it is to meet. And it doesn't have to be every teacher, but it could be certain teachers, certain core teachers, or certain teachers that are the classes that your child loves the most. There can be some variation there, but I would say school trainings are super important to look into. Oh, this one is about Communicamp. My son attended it last year and it went great. Would doing it again be helpful? Communicamp doesn't have to be a one-time event. Many families come back and visit at certain times of the year because their child's in a different place of communication so that when they come back they're working on new skills at that camp. So it's not come once and you're good. I always say, like, even from the parent training piece, that you may sit during a parent training just like so you are sitting here, certain things you may say my child's not ready for that. But if you work on strategies and goals, let's say you came back, next summer and we were doing this webinar again, or you listened to it again on the recording and you're like, wow, we made so much progress this year. So now when I go back and listen, I can actually apply those things that were mentioned because we're in a different place too. And my mind is open more to apply and learn. And the same thing with Communicamp is that kids can come back for refreshers. Kids feel more confident when they come back. They remember being there. They know the routine. So it gives them a boost before the school year. And parents always learn again too, because your children are in different places. So yes, it's always helpful to come back if you can. Not everyone can. I think we'll wrap up at this point. You all asked such great questions, and certainly, Kristen, you're welcome to share my information in the slides and post session information. And if there are questions, certainly families can reach out and ask those questions if we didn't cover some of them. So I hope that was helpful today.
Definitely. Thank you so much. And thanks everyone for joining us tonight.
Thanks, Kristen. Thank you all. Have a great evening.
Bye.